under a sky that hadn't seen rain like this in decades. The river had swollen, the back roads vanished beneath a muddy, swirling tide, leaving a struggling farmer isolated with his worries. Then a flash of headlights through the downpour, a figure stranded against the rising water. And a simple offer of shelter would unlock a future he couldn't possibly imagine, proving that sometimes the greatest stories and the greatest lifelines arrive when you least expect them. Before we carry on, let me know where you are watching from in the comments, and hit the subscribe button for something special tomorrow. The rain had been relentless for 3 days, a solid gray curtain that obscured the world beyond the edges of Elias Thorne's small farm, turning the usually gentle landscape into a blurred, watery expanse. It wasn't a gentle, life-giving rain, the kind the parched earth desperately needed after a long, dry summer that had cracked the soil and withered the crops, but a furious, biblical downpour, a relentless assault from the sky that had turned the quiet creek into a raging torrent, brown and churning, and the low-lying backroads into impassable brown rivers, swirling with debris. Inside the old farmhouse, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth that seemed to seep through the very walls and wood smoke from the small fire Elias had lit in the hearth. A futile attempt to chase away the pervasive chill that seemed to have settled deep into the bones of the house, a cold that mirrored the one in his own. He stood by the kitchen window, the glass cool and wet beneath his fingertips, watching the water rise in the fields closest to the creek, a silent, relentless invasion. The water was creeping closer to the barn, a dark, ominous line advancing across the pasture. Just like the bank's deadline, the foreclosure notice wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a physical weight, a white rectangle of dread that he tried not to look at, tucked under a stack of unpaid bills on the counter, but whose presence he felt in every corner of the house, every aching joint in his body, every weary beat of his heart. 3 months. That's all the time he had left. 3 months to come up with a sum of money that felt as vast and impossible to reach as the stormy, unreachable sky above. The farm, 80 acres of mixed pasture and woodland, a patchwork of green and brown and gray, had been in his family for 4 generations. His great-grandfather had built the farmhouse with his own hands, hauling timber from the backwoods, clearing the land with a mule and a plow, leaving his mark on the very soil. His grandfather had survived the Dust Bowl here, clinging to the land through years of drought and hardship. His father had modernized the dairy, investing in new equipment before the market collapsed, leaving them with debt and a farm that was no longer viable in its traditional form. And now, Elias, the last of the line, the end of the story, was the one who would lose it all. The dairy was gone, the milking parlor silent and empty, replaced by a struggling attempt at raising heritage breed chickens, selling eggs at the local farmer's market, and a small market garden. Ventures that barely brought in enough to cover the feed and seed, let alone the mounting debt that had accumulated over years of trying to keep the farm afloat. Every year seemed to bring a new challenge, a new setback, a late frost that killed the early seedlings, a blight that ruined the tomato crop, a sudden drop in egg prices, a piece of ancient equipment breaking down at the worst possible moment. He was fighting a losing battle, a battle against forces larger than himself, against economics, against the weather, against time, and he knew it, deep down, in the quiet, lonely hours of the night when sleep refused to come. He was in his late 40s, his hands rough and calloused from years of physical work. The lines on his palms, a map of a life spent working the land, his back often aching with a dull, constant pain, his face lined with worry and sun and the passage of time. He was a man of few words, more comfortable with the quiet rhythm of the farm, the predictable cycles of nature, the silent companionship of the animals, than with the complexities of human interaction or the unforgiving abstract world of finance and paperwork. He was a widower, his wife, Martha, having passed away 5 years ago after a short, brutal illness that had taken her quickly, leaving a gaping hole in his life and in the farmhouse. The silence in the house since then had been a constant companion, a heavy presence, broken only by the sounds of the farm, the clucking of the chickens in the coop, the wind in the trees that surrounded the property, the relentless drumming of the rain on the roof. He missed her every day, her quiet strength, her steady presence, the way she could make him laugh, even when things were at their worst, the way she understood him, without him having to say a word. He missed sharing the burden, the small victories, the quiet moments of peace at the end of the day. Now, he carried it all alone, the weight of the farm, the debt, the loneliness, all on his own shoulders. The storm showed no signs of letting up. The wind howled around the old farmhouse, a mournful, lonely sound that seemed to echo the emptiness inside him, rattling the window panes, testing the strength of the old structure. The rain continued to pour down, a solid sheet of water that turned the world outside into a watery, gray blur, reducing visibility to mere yards. He should be checking the barn, ensuring the chickens were secure, that the roof wasn't leaking, but the water was getting too deep in the yard, swirling around the base of the barn, threatening to flood the lower level. He felt a sense of helplessness, a familiar feeling these days, the feeling of being overwhelmed by forces beyond his control. A sudden, unexpected flash of light caught his eye through the rain-streaked window, cutting through the gloom. Headlights. On the back road that led past his farm, a road that should have been completely submerged by now, impassable to any vehicle. He frowned, peering closer, wiping a hand across the wet glass. The headlights were stationary, low down, partially obscured by the rising water, their beams weak and diffused by the heavy rain. Someone was out there, stranded, on the back road, in the middle of the storm. His first instinct, honed by years of solitude, by the self-contained nature of his struggle, by the sheer exhaustion of fighting a losing battle, was to ignore it. He had nothing to offer, no energy for dealing with a stranger, not when his own world was collapsing around him. He was barely keeping his own head above water, literally and figuratively, drowning in debt and despair. He couldn't save anyone else. But another instinct, one buried deep beneath the layers of weariness and despair, the one instilled in him by generations of thorns, who believed you helped your neighbor, no matter what, who understood the isolation of rural life and the importance of community, of lending a hand in times of need, rose, quote, to the surface, asserting itself over his self-pity and exhaustion. No one should be out there in this. It was dangerous. The water was rising fast. The current in the flooded road was strong, capable of sweeping a small car away. He pulled on his heavy work boots, the leather stiff and worn, but waterproof, and grabbed his old canvas coat from the hook by the back door, its fabric smelling faintly of damp earth and old dust. He lit a lantern, its warm, flickering glow a small beacon in the dim kitchen, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze falling on the foreclosure notice on the counter, a grim reminder of his own troubles, a heavy weight in his gut. But the thought of someone stranded out there, alone in the storm, vulnerable and in danger, pushed him forward, overriding his fear and his exhaustion. He couldn't just leave them. It wasn't in him. He stepped out onto the back porch, the rain hitting him like a physical blow, cold and hard, the wind tearing at his coat, whipping his hair around his face. The water in the yard was already ankle-deep, cold and muddy, swirling around his boots. He waded out, the water rising with every step, making his way towards the back road, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, saturated earth beneath the water. The sound of the rain drumming on his coat and hat, the rush of the floodwater, filled his ears, a deafening roar. As he got closer to the road, the water was knee-deep, swirling with debris, branches, leaves, trash, all carried by the current. He could see the vehicle more clearly now. A small, dark car, partially submerged, listing slightly, its headlights still on, cutting weak, diffused beams through the driving rain, illuminating the muddy water. A figure stood beside it, a woman, huddled against the storm, her body language conveying utter helplessness, looking utterly lost and vulnerable. She was waving a hand weakly towards his farmhouse, a desperate signal for help, a last resort. He waded through the swirling water, the current tugging at his legs, calling out against the wind and the rain, his voice rough but loud. "Hey! Over here! Can you hear me? Up to the house!" She turned towards the sound of his voice, her head snapping up, her face barely visible in the dim light and the heavy rain, but he could see a flicker of hope enter her expression, even at this distance, a desperate hope in the face of despair. As he got closer, wading through the cold water, he could see she was soaked to the bone, her clothes clinging to her thin frame, her hair plastered to her face and neck, dripping water. She looked like she was shivering violently, her body shaking with cold and fear. "Thank God," she called back, her voice thin and trembling, barely audible above the roar of the storm, a fragile sound in the vastness of the rain. "My car, it died. Just stopped in the water. The water, it just came up so fast. I didn't realize. I don't know what to do." "Roads flooded out proper," Elias said, stating the obvious, his voice rough but steady. "Can't drive out of this. Not going anywhere in that car tonight. You need to get out of the rain. Get warm. Come on, up to the house. It's not much, an old farmhouse, but it's dry, and there's a fire going." She hesitated for a moment, looking from him, a large, rough-looking man in a work coat, to the dark, imposing farmhouse silhouetted against the gray sky, then back at the rising water, the dangerous current swirling around her car. Fear was evident in her eyes, the fear of a stranger, the fear of the unknown, the fear of the situation she was in. "It's all right," Elias said, trying to sound reassuring, to ease her fear. "I'm Elias Thorne. This is my farm. The house is old, seen a lot of storms, but it's solid. You'll be safe there. You can't stay out here." She seemed to make a decision, a quick, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," she said, her voice still trembling, but with a note of resolve. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done." He reached on a hand, a large, rough hand, calloused and strong from years of working the land, offering it to her. She took it, her fingers cold and trembling in his, her grip surprisingly firm despite her shaking. He guided her through the swirling water, back towards the farmhouse, towards the faint glow of the lantern in the kitchen window. The walk felt longer and more difficult than it should have. Fighting against the current, the water rising with every minute, the cold seeping into his boots, into his bones. He kept a firm grip on her hand, ensuring she didn't stumble in the unseen potholes and debris beneath the muddy water. They reached the porch, stepping out of the water and onto the dry, solid planks. She was shivering uncontrollably, her whole body, shaking. Her teeth chattering faintly, her clothes were soaked through, dripping water onto the worn wood of the porch. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue with cold. She looked utterly exhausted, physically and emotionally. "Come on in," Elias said, opening the back door into the kitchen, stepping aside to let her enter. She stepped inside, into the warmth and relative quiet of the kitchen, leaving a trail of muddy water on the linoleum floor. The contrast between the storm's fury outside and the stillness inside was stark, a sudden, welcome reprieve. She stood just inside the door, looking around the kitchen, her eyes wide, taking in the space. It was a simple, old-fashioned kitchen, worn but clean, with a large wood-burning stove that radiated a comforting heat, a scarred oak table that bore the marks of countless meals and, conversations, mismatched chairs pulled up around it, and open shelves lined with jars of preserves, fruits and vegetables canned from his garden in better years. It smelled of wood smoke, old coffee, and something faintly earthy, the scent of the farm. "You're soaked through," Elias said, taking off his own dripping coat and hanging it by the door, the water puddling on the floor beneath it. "You need to get out of those wet clothes right away. You'll catch cold. I don't have much in the way of spare clothes for a woman, living alone, but I can find you something dry. And I can make some hot coffee, take you warm from the inside out." She nodded, still shivering, her body shaking with cold. "Anything," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you. Just to be out of the rain." Elias went to the small pantry off the kitchen, where he kept spare blankets, old coats, and a few changes of his own old clothes. He rummaged around and found a pair of his own sweatpants, several sizes too large for her, and a thick, faded flannel shirt, soft from countless washings. They were clean and dry. He also grabbed a couple of old, soft bath towels from a shelf. He came back into the kitchen and handed her the clothes and towels. "These are mine," he explained, feeling a bit awkward about the ill-fitting garments. "They'll be big, I expect, but they're clean and dry. You can change in the bathroom, just down the hall." He gestured towards a door off the living room, visible from the kitchen. "Take your time. Get warm. I'll get the coffee on properly." She took the clothes and towels from him, her fingers cold and trembling as they brushed against his. "Thank you," she said again, her voice a little stronger now, filled with a palpable sense of relief and gratitude. "I'm truly grateful for your kindness." She went down the short hallway towards the bathroom, her footsteps muffled by the old rug, closing the door softly behind her. Elias watched her go, a strange, unexpected presence in his quiet, solitary world. A sudden splash of color in a life that had felt muted and gray for too long. He turned to the wood-burning stove, stoked the fire, adding more wood to ensure it was burning brightly, and put a kettle of fresh water on to heat, the metal singing faintly as it warmed. As he waited for the water to boil, his mind, usually consumed by worries about the farm, the debt, the looming foreclosure, found itself dwelling on the woman, on Eleanor Vance. Who was she? Where was she going? Driving on these isolated back roads in this kind of weather, in a car that looked too small, too low to the ground, for rural travel. She didn't look like anyone from around here. Her clothes, even soaked and muddy, had a certain cut, a certain quality that spoke of a different world. A world far removed from his own. He moved the foreclosure notice further under the stack of bills on the counter. A futile gesture, he knew, but one that made him feel slightly less exposed, less like a failure in the face of this unexpected visitor. He was a struggling farmer, about to lose everything he had ever known. She was someone else, someone who drove a car that couldn't handle a little water, someone who looked out of place in his worn-down farmhouse, someone who spoke with an accent he couldn't quite place, refined, educated. The kettle began to whistle, a high-pitched, piercing sound that cut through the quiet of the kitchen. He took it off the stove and made a pot of strong coffee, using fresh grounds, the rich, dark aroma filling the kitchen, a comforting, familiar scent that always felt like home. He poured 2 mugs, added a little milk and sugar to one, just the way Martha used to like it, a small, unconscious habit that still lingered years after her death. He set the mugs on the scarred oak table, the steam rising in the cool air. After a few minutes, the bathroom door opened, and she emerged. She was wearing his sweatpants, the legs rolled up several times at the ankles, making them look like oversized culottes, and the flannel shirt, which hung loosely on her small frame, the sleeves covering her hands. Her dark hair was damp, but she had used the towel to dry it partially, and it curled softly around her face and neck. She looked infinitely better, warmer, less fragile, though still pale. Her features softened now that the tension of cold and fear had eased. She walked into the kitchen and stopped, looking around the room, her eyes lingering on the details, the warm glow from the wood stove, the mugs of coffee on the table, the comfortable clutter of a lived-in space. "That smells wonderful," she said, her voice clearer now, softer, with that hint of an accent he couldn't quite place. Educated, perhaps from the city. "Sit down," Elias said, gesturing to a chair at the table. "Get warm. Drink your coffee. It's hot." She walked over and sat down, pulling the large shirt tighter around her, tucking her feet up onto the run of the chair. She picked up the mug, wrapping both her hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her fingers, into her palms. She took a slow, careful sip, closing her eyes for a moment, a small sigh escaping her lips. "That is the best coffee I've ever had," she said, opening her eyes and smiling faintly, a genuine, appreciative smile. Elias felt a small, unexpected warmth spread through him, a flicker of pride in his simple offering. "Just coffee," he mumbled, unused to compliments, especially about something so ordinary. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the steady drumming of the rain on the roof, which had lessened slightly, and the quiet sounds of her sipping her coffee. the clinking of the mug against the table. Elias watched her, still wondering about her story, but unwilling to pry, respecting her privacy, just as she had respected his unspoken solitude. Finally, she spoke, breaking the comfortable silence. "I'm Eleanor Vance," she said, introducing herself properly. "Thank you, Elias, for taking me in. You didn't have to. I was completely stranded out there. It was getting dangerous." Eleanor Vance. The name didn't ring any bells. He wasn't someone who followed the news or read magazines. He nodded. "Just doing what anyone would," he said, the familiar phrase coming automatically, a simple statement of his belief in helping others. Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that reached her dark, intelligent eyes. "I'm not so sure about that, Elias," she said softly, her voice thoughtful. "Some people would have just driven by, or told me to wait in my car and call for help. In this weather, with the water rising, it was a real kindness, a brave kindness." She looked around the kitchen again, her gaze lingering on the details, the old wood stove, the worn table, the photos on the wall, faded images of his family, of Martha, of a life lived here. "This is a lovely old farmhouse," she commented. "It feels solid, like it has a history, a sense of permanence." "It does," Elias said, a note of pride entering his voice despite himself, a fierce, protective love for this old house. "This land. 4 generations of Thorns. My great-grandfather built it back in the 1880 say. My family's been here ever since, working the land." He stopped himself from adding, the words catching in his throat, the familiar weight returning. "And I'm the one who's going to lose it, the one who couldn't keep it going, the one who broke the chain." Eleanor didn't ask about the history in detail, didn't ask about his family. Not yet. She just nodded, her expression thoughtful, her gaze lingering on the photos. She seemed content to sit in the warmth, sipping her coffee, letting the quiet of the farmhouse settle around her, a quiet that was a balm after the storm, after whatever she had been through before. "I was trying to get to Oakhaven," she explained finally, referring to a small town about 50 miles away, nestled in the hills. "I have a cabin there. I was hoping for some quiet time, some solitude, a place to work." Oakhaven. Elias knew it. A small, picturesque town, popular with artists and writers seeking inspiration, a place known for its quiet beauty and its small, independent bookstores. So she was a writer, perhaps? It would explain the desire for solitude, for a place away from the hustle and bustle. "Roads are pretty bad out here when it rains like this," Elias said. "Especially the back roads like the one you were on. They tend to flood fast with the creek rising." "I learned that the hard way," Eleanor said with a wry smile, a hint of self-deprecation in her voice. "My GPS rerouted me when the main road was closed due to flooding, but it didn't account for the flooding on these smaller roads. I thought I could make it through, but the water just came up so fast, and then my car just stopped, died right there in the middle of the road. Water must have gotten into something important, the engine, the electrical system." They talked for a while longer, the conversation flowing easily between them despite their different worlds, their different lives. Elias found himself talking more than he usually did, more than he had in years, telling her a little about the farm, about the challenges of farming these days, the unpredictable weather, the changing markets, the difficulty of making a living from the land now. He didn't mention the debt, the foreclosure, the crushing weight of his worries, not directly, but the underlying struggle was evident in his words, in the weariness in his voice, in the lines etched on his face. Eleanor listened attentively, her dark eyes intelligent and curious, absorbing every word. She asked thoughtful questions, not just polite inquiries, but questions that showed a genuine interest, a desire to understand the realities of his life, the connection to the land, the history of the place. She didn't talk much about herself, about her work, just that she was a writer seeking solitude and inspiration. She seemed genuinely interested in his life, in the realities of farming, in the history of the farmhouse, in the quiet rhythm of his days. As the evening wore on, The rain finally began to ease, slowing to a steady drizzle, though the wind still howled around the old house, a reminder of the storm's power. It was clear she wouldn't be able to leave that night. The roads would be impassable until the water receded significantly, which could take hours, maybe even a day or two, depending on how much more rain fell and how quickly the creek went down. "Looks like you'll be here for the night," Elias said, stating the obvious, a note of something he couldn't quite identify in his voice, a mix of resignation and something else. "The guest room isn't much, hasn't been used in years, dusty probably, but the bed's made up with clean sheets. You're welcome to stay, it's dry and warm." Eleanor hesitated for a moment, looking around the simple kitchen, at the worn furniture, at Elias, a large, quiet man who had offered her shelter without question. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice soft, mindful of being an imposition. "I don't want to be a bother. I can sleep on the sofa if it's easier." "Not a bother," Elias said, shaking his head. "Can't have you sitting in a flooded car all night, or sleeping on a lumpy sofa. The guest room's ready. It's no trouble. It's been empty a long time." "Thank you, Elias," she said, her voice soft, filled with genuine gratitude. "That's very kind of you, more than kind." He showed her to the guest room, a small, clean room at the front of the house, filled with old furniture, a double bed covered with a patchwork quilt, a wooden dresser, a small armchair. It smelled faintly of lavender from dried flowers Martha had placed in a bowl on the dresser years ago, a scent that always brought a bittersweet ache to Elias's chest. The bed was neatly made, the sheets crisp and clean. It was a simple, comfortable room, a room that held memories of visitors past, family and friends who had stayed here, of a time when the house was filled with more life, more laughter. "There are extra blankets in the closet if you get cold during the night," Elias said, opening the door to a small closet filled with old coats and blankets. "The bathroom's just down the hall. First door on the left. Make yourself at home, Eleanor. Get some rest." "Thank you, Elias," Eleanor said again, her gaze meeting his, her dark eyes holding a depth of gratitude that went beyond the simple offer of shelter, a look that conveyed a sense of being truly seen, truly helped. He left her to settle in, closing the door softly behind him, returning to the quiet kitchen. He sat by the dying fire in the hearth, listening to the wind and the steady drip of water from the eaves outside. His mind was still buzzing from the unexpected company, the sudden intrusion of another person into his quiet, solitary world. It had been a long time since he had shared his home with anyone, since Martha was gone. It felt strange, unfamiliar, but not entirely unpleasant. He thought about Eleanor Vance, the writer seeking solitude in Oak Haven, now unexpectedly stranded in his worn-down farmhouse. She seemed different from what he expected a writer to be, less bohemian, less flamboyant, more composed, observant, quiet. There was a quiet intensity about her, a sense that she was taking everything in, processing it, storing it away. He wondered what she wrote about. Romance novels? Mysteries? Historical fiction? He knew nothing about the world of books, his reading limited to farming journals, seed catalogs, and the local newspaper. He banked the fire for the night, pushing the glowing embers under the ashes to keep them alive until morning, a habit learned from years of heating with wood. He went to bed, the old house creaking and settling around him, the sounds familiar and comforting. Sleep didn't come easily, despite his exhaustion. His mind, instead of replaying his financial worries, the looming debt, the impending foreclosure, was filled with images of the storm, the flooded road, the woman's face in the headlights, her quiet presence in his kitchen, her smile, her dark, observant eyes. It was a distraction, a temporary reprieve from the relentless pressure of his own life, a brief escape from the weight he carried. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Not gradually, but with a sudden, decisive cessation, as if the sky had simply run out of water, as if a switch had been flipped. The air was still, quiet after the fury of the storm, heavy with the scent of damp earth, crushed leaves, and the lingering, clean smell of ozone. Elias woke early, As always, the habit ingrained after decades of farm life, his internal clock set by the rhythm of the sun and the demands of the animals, regardless of the weather or the state of his finances. He lay in bed for a few moments, listening to the unfamiliar silence, a silence that felt different from the usual quiet of his solitary life. It was a silence that held the faint echo of another person's presence in the house, a warmth that lingered after the storm. It held the memory of conversation, of shared space. Eleanor. He got up, pulled on his worn jeans and a clean work shirt, and went downstairs to the kitchen. The room was cool, but held the lingering warmth from the fire he had banked the night before. He stoked the embers, added a few pieces of kindling and a larger log, and soon had a small, cheerful fire crackling and popping in the wood stove, its heat spreading through the room. He put the kettle on for coffee, filling it with fresh water, the familiar ritual, a comforting, grounding start to the day, a small piece of normalcy in a life that felt anything but normal. As he waited for the water to boil, he walked to the window and looked out at the yard. The sky was still overcast, a uniform, soft gray, but the clouds were higher now, broken in places, revealing patches of pale blue, hinting at the possibility of the sun later. The yard was a mess of mud, standing water, and scattered debris. Branches torn from trees, leaves, pieces of trash and tangled weeds washed down from the road. The back road was still submerged, a wide, brown river flowing where the gravel track should have been, the water level still high. The fields closest to the creek were lakes, reflecting the gray sky, the fence posts partially submerged. The water level had receded slightly overnight, leaving a muddy waterline on the fence posts and the base of the barn. But the barn itself and the farmhouse were safe. The water had come close, but had not breached their foundations. He thought about Eleanor, sleeping in the guest room. He wondered if she was awake, if she was used to the quiet of the countryside, so different from the sounds of a town or city, the traffic, the sirens, the constant hum of human activity. He wondered what she was thinking, this writer seeking solitude, now unexpectedly stranded in his worn-down farmhouse, a place so far removed from the world she seemed to inhabit. He heard movement from the front of the house, the soft creak of the guest room door opening, followed by the sound of the bathroom door opening and closing. A few minutes later, she appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his oversized sweatpants and flannel shirt, the clothes hanging loosely on her small frame, looking even more like borrowed pajamas in the morning light. She looked more rested now, the lines of exhaustion softened, her dark eyes clear and alert, taking in the scene, the warm kitchen, the smell of coffee. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice quiet in the stillness of the kitchen, a gentle intrusion on the silence. "Morning," Elias replied, turning from the stove. "Coffee's ready. Water's gone down a bit overnight, but the road's still underwater. Might be a while before you can get out." "I saw," she said, walking into the kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the air, a comforting aroma after the dampness of the storm. "Thank you." She sat at the scarred oak table, pulling the large shirt tighter around her, tucking her feet up onto the run of the chair. She picked up the mug, wrapping both her hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her fingers, into her palms, chasing away the lingering chill of the night. She took a slow, careful sip, closing her eyes for a moment, a small sigh escaping her lips, a sound of simple pleasure. "That is the best coffee I've ever had," she said, opening her eyes and smiling faintly, the genuine, appreciative smile that reached her eyes. Elias felt a small, unexpected warmth spread through him, a flicker of pride in his simple offering, his strong coffee. "Just coffee," he mumbled, unused to compliments, especially about something so ordinary, so everyday. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the quiet crackling of the fire in the wood stove, the distant drip of water from the eaves, and the quiet sounds of her sipping her coffee, the gentle clinking of the mug against the table. Elias watched her, still wondering about her story, about the world she came from, but unwilling to pry, respecting her privacy, just as she had respected his unspoken solitude, the quiet grief he carried. Finally she spoke, breaking the comfortable silence. "I'm Eleanor Vance," she said, introducing herself properly, as if she hadn't done so the night before, a subtle formality. "Thank you, Elias, for taking me in. You didn't have to. I was completely stranded out there. It was getting dangerous, with the water rising." Eleanor Vance. The name still didn't ring any bells for Elias. He wasn't someone who followed the news or read magazines. His world was the farm, the local community. He nodded. "Just doing what anyone would," he said, the familiar phrase coming automatically. A simple statement of his belief in helping others, a code he lived by. Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that reached her dark, intelligent eyes, a smile that held a hint of understanding. "I'm not so sure about that, Elias," she said softly, her voice thoughtful, contemplative. "Some people would have just driven by, or told me to wait in my car and call for help. In that weather, with the water rising so fast, it was a real kindness, a brave kindness, wading out into that water." She looked around the kitchen again, her gaze lingering on the details, the old wood stove, the worn table, the mismatched chairs, the shelves of preserves, the framed photos on the wall, faded images of his family, of Martha, of a life lived here. A history visible in the objects and the wear of the room. "This is a lovely old farmhouse," she commented, her voice filled with a quiet appreciation. "It feels solid, grounded, like it has a history, a sense of permanence, a soul." Elias felt a familiar pang at her words, a sharp, sudden ache in his chest, a reminder of what he was about to lose. The history, the soul that was woven into the very fabric of this place, a soul that had been nurtured by Texan, generations of his family. This old farmhouse, it did have a soul woven from the lives of his family, from generations of work and love and loss, from births and deaths and everything in between, a soul that was now facing eviction. "It does," Elias said, a note of pride entering his voice despite himself, a fierce, protective pride in this place that was his, that was them. 4 generations of thorns. My great-grandfather built it back in the 1880s, cleared the land himself. My family's been here ever since, working the land, living in these rooms. Wah. He stopped himself from adding, the words catching in his throat, the familiar weight returning, the shame of his failure. "And I'm the one who's going to lose it, the one who couldn't keep it going, the one who broke the chain, the one who failed my family." Eleanor didn't ask about the history in detail, didn't ask about his family. Not yet. She just nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful, her gaze lingering on the photos, as if trying to read the stories in the faded images. She seemed content to sit in the warmth, sipping her coffee, letting the quiet of the farmhouse settle around her, a quiet that was a balm after the storm, after whatever she had been through before, a quiet that seemed to soothe something restless within her. "I was trying to get to Oakhaven," she explained finally, referring to a small town about 50 miles away, nestled in the hills, known for its arts community and its quiet charm. "I have a cabin there. I was hoping for some quiet time, some solitude, a place to work, to write." Oakhaven. Elias knew it. A small, picturesque town, popular with artists and writers seeking inspiration. A place known for its quiet beauty and its small, independent bookstores and cafes. So, she was a writer, perhaps? It would explain the desire for solitude, for a place away from the hustle and bustle, a place where she could focus. "Roads are pretty bad out here when it rains like this," Elias said. "Especially the back roads like the one you were on. They tend to flood fast with the creek rising. It happens every few years with a bad storm. I learned that the hard way," Eleanor said with a wry smile, a hint of self-deprecation in her voice. "My GPS rerouted me when the main road was closed due to flooding, but it didn't account for the flooding on these smaller roads. I thought I could make it through, that my car could handle it, but the water just came up so fast, and then my car just stopped, died right there in the middle of the road. Water must have gotten into something important, the engine, the electrical system. I was just sitting there, watching the water rise, not knowing what to do, And then I saw the light from your house." They talked for a while longer, the conversation flowing easily between them despite their different worlds, their different lives, the vast differences in their experiences. Elias found himself talking more than he usually did. More than he had in years. The words coming surprisingly easily, telling her a little about the farm, about the challenges of farming these days, the unpredictable weather, the changing markets, the difficulty of making a pry. Living from the land now. He didn't mention the debt, the foreclosure, the crushing weight of his worries, not directly, but the underlying struggle, the constant effort, the precariousness of his situation, was evident in his words, in the weariness in his voice, in the lines etched on his face, in the way he looked at the fields. Eleanor listened attentively, her dark eyes intelligent and curious, absorbing every word. She asked thoughtful questions, not just polite inquiries, but questions that showed a genuine interest, a desire to understand the realities of his life, the connection to the land, the history of the place, the man who lived here. She didn't talk much about herself, about her work, just that she was a writer seeking solitude and inspiration. She seemed genuinely interested in his life, in the realities of farming, in the history of the farmhouse, in the quiet rhythm of his days, in the man he was. As the morning wore on, the clouds began to break up further, revealing more patches of blue sky. The sun was trying to push through. Elias knew he needed to get out and check the farm properly, assess the damage, tend to the chickens. Eleanor asked if she could help. Elias hesitated for a moment. He wasn't used to having company, let alone help, with his chores. Farming was a solitary pursuit for him now. But there was something in her eyes, a quiet determination, a genuine desire to be useful, that made him agree. "It's muddy out there," he warned her, looking at her borrowed, oversized clothes. "Real muddy and wet." "I don't mind," she said, smiling. "I'm already in borrowed clothes. A little more mud won't hurt them. Or me. I'd like to see the farm, see what you do." He found her a pair of old rubber boots in the mudroom by the back door, boots that had belonged to Martha, too big for Eleanor, but they would keep her feet dry. They walked out together into the yard, the ground soft and muddy underfoot, the air cool and damp. The water had receded slightly, leaving large puddles and streaks of mud everywhere, and the back road was still submerged, a wide brown expanse. They went to the chicken coop first. Elias showed her how to collect the eggs from the nesting boxes, how to check for broody hens, how to feed them, how to make sure they had clean water. Eleanor was a quick learner, observant and careful, listening to his instructions, asking questions. She moved with a quiet grace that surprised him, her small hands surprisingly deft as she reached into the nesting boxes and gathered the warm eggs, holding them carefully in her palms. They worked together in comfortable silence, the only sounds the clucking and scratching of the chickens, the drip of water from the trees, and the squelch of their boots in the mud. Elias found himself enjoying the company, the shared activity, the simple act of working alongside another person. It had been a long time since he had worked alongside anyone, not since Martha was gone. It felt good, natural, like the farm was coming back to life in small ways. As they worked, Eleanor asked more questions, observing everything with a keen eye, taking notes in a small, waterproof notebook she had in the pocket of the flannel shirt. She asked about the different breeds of chickens, their personalities, their quirks, about the challenges of raising them organically, protecting them from predators. She seemed fascinated by the details of his life, the simple, everyday tasks that made up his world, the connection between his work and the food they produced. "It's all so real," she said at one point, looking around the chicken coop, the straw, the nesting boxes, the busy birds scratching in the dirt. "So tangible, so connected to the earth. My world is mostly words, ideas, screens, meetings, deadlines. It's often abstract. This is different. It has a weight to it." Elias didn't quite understand what she meant by her world being abstract, but he nodded. His world was tangible. It was earth and animals and weather. It was hard work and uncertain outcomes. It was real, in a way that sometimes felt brutally so. They spent the rest of the morning working together, checking on the small market garden, which was waterlogged but mostly undamaged, clearing debris that the storm had washed into the yard, assessing the damage to the fences along the creek, which would need repair once the water went down. Elias found himself talking freely, explaining things about the farm, about the land, about the challenges he faced, about his hopes and frustrations. He still didn't mention the debt, the foreclosure, the crushing weight of his worries, but he spoke of the difficulty of making a living, the constant struggle against forces beyond his control, the uncertainty of farming in a changing world. Eleanor listened, observed, and took notes. She didn't offer advice or platitudes, didn't pretend to have answers to his problems. She just listened, her presence a quiet, supportive one, a silent witness to his life, his struggles, his connection to the land. As they worked, Elias began to notice things about her, details he hadn't registered the night before. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about something that interested her, a spark of enthusiasm that was infectious. The way she smiled, a genuine, open smile that transformed her face, erasing the lines of fatigue and worry. The quiet determination in her movements despite her small size, the way she didn't complain about the mud or the dampness. She was clearly intelligent, observant, and had a quiet strength about her, a resilience that he recognized. They went back to the farmhouse for lunch, simple sandwiches made with bread Elias had baked a few days earlier, and more coffee. The conversation flowed easily, comfortably, shifting from the farm to more general topics, books, movies, the differences between city life and country life, the challenges of their respective worlds. Elias found himself laughing, something he hadn't done in a long time, the sound feeling rusty and unfamiliar in his own ears. Eleanor had a dry wit, a sharp intelligence, a way of looking at the world that was both insightful and amusing. In the afternoon, the sun finally broke through the clouds, pushing aside the gray curtain and casting a warm, golden light over the farm. The change in atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. The world seemed to sparkle, the water in the puddles reflecting the sunlight, the wet leaves on the trees glistening. The water on the back road was slowly receding, the current lessening, but it was still too deep for her small car to get through. It was clear she would be staying another night. Elias felt a strange mix of disappointment and something else, something akin to pleasure, a quiet warmth at the prospect of her staying. Her presence had brought a lightness to the old farmhouse, a break in the long-standing silence, a sense that the world outside his worries still existed. They spent the afternoon exploring the parts of the farm that weren't flooded, walking through the woods, the air cool and damp and smelling of pine and wet earth, down to the creek where the water was still high and fast, rushing over the rocks with a powerful roar. Eleanor seemed captivated by the beauty of the place, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the forest floor, the sounds of nature, the birds beginning to sing again after the storm, the rush of the rush. Water. She took more notes in her small notebook, asked more questions about the trees, the plants, the history of the creek, its role in the farm's life. "There's a story here, Elias," she said at one point, standing by the creek, watching the water rush by, her voice quiet, thoughtful. "So many stories. In the land, in the old house, in the barn, in your life. It feels ancient and alive." Elias shrugged, looking out at the rushing water. "Just a farmer's life," he said, his voice rough. "Not very exciting." "Not much of the story." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes serious, a look of quiet intensity on her face. "Every life has a story, Elias," she said softly, but with conviction. "Every place holds stories. And some stories are just waiting to be told. Waiting for the right words, the right person to tell them." As evening approached, they made a simple dinner together in the kitchen, using vegetables from his garden that he had frozen earlier in the year, and some of the fresh eggs from the chickens. Cooking together felt natural, comfortable, like they had been doing it for years, a quiet domesticity settling over the kitchen. They talked about books, about writing, about the summer. Creative process. About where ideas came from. Elias knew nothing about it, but he listened, fascinated by her world, so different from his own. A world of imagination and words. Eleanor spoke a little more about her work, about the bout. Challenges of finding inspiration, the pressure of deadlines and expectations, the difficulty of creating something new, something meaningful. She hinted at the demands of her career, the lack of privacy that came with success, the constant travel, the feeling of being disconnected from real life. It sounded like a glamorous life from the outside, but also a lonely one. In its own way, a life lived in hotels and airports and public appearances. That's why I come to places like Oakhaven, she explained, looking around the quiet kitchen, at the fire and the stove. To disconnect from all that. To find quiet. To find real life. To ground myself. Elias realized then that his worn-down farmhouse, his struggling farm, his quiet, solitary life, the very things he felt ashamed of, was for her, real life. It was a humbling thought, a shift in perspective he hadn't expected. They sat by the fire after dinner. The conversation flowing easily, comfortably. The silence between them not empty, but companionable. Elias found himself telling her more about his life, about Martha, about their life together on the farm, about Tria. Their dreams for the future? Dreams that had been cut short. He spoke of his grief, of the emptiness her loss had left in his life, the silence in the house, the difficulty of carrying on alone. It was the first time he had spoken about it so openly, so honestly, in years, perhaps since Martha was gone. Eleanor listened with quiet empathy, her presence a comforting one. She didn't offer platitudes, didn't try to fix his grief. She just listened, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight, a silent, understanding witness to his pain. Grief is like the tide, she said softly, her voice quiet, thoughtful. It comes in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes overwhelming, threatening to pull you under. You learn to ride it, to navigate the currents, but it never completely leaves you. It becomes a part of you. Her words resonated with him, a simple, profound truth that he recognized in his own life. She understood. He learned a little more about her too, hints of a life lived in the public eye, of the pressures of success. The difficulty of finding genuine connection in a world that often valued her for her fame and fortune rather than for who she was. She spoke of feeling like she was constantly performing, constantly on display. The public persona sometimes overshadowing the private person, the solitude of the farmhouse, the simple humanity of their interaction, the lack of pretense, seemed to be a balm to her soul, a place where she could just be. As the night grew late, the fire in the hearth dying down to embers, they both knew it was time for bed. The storm had passed, the rain had stopped, but the roads were still impassable. Another day, another night in the farmhouse. Thank you again, Elias, Eleanor said, standing by the kitchen door, ready to head to the guest room. For everything, for your kindness, for your company, for sharing your home and your life with me. It's been a gift. It's been good company, Elias said, feeling a sense of regret that the unexpected visit was temporary, that she would be leaving soon. Quiet out here usually. Too quiet. Eleanor smiled, a warm, genuine smile. Sometimes, she said softly, her voice thoughtful, quiet is exactly what you need, a place to hear yourself think, and sometimes, in the quiet, you find things you weren't even looking for. Things that change everything. She went to the guest room, leaving Elias alone in the quiet kitchen. He sat by the dying fire for a long time. The silence of the farmhouse, no longer feeling empty, but filled with the echoes of their conversation, the warmth of her presence, the lingering scent of coffee and wood smoke. He thought about her words, about finding things in the quiet. He hadn't been looking for anything, just enduring, just trying to hold on. But her arrival, unexpected and sudden, had brought something into his life, a break in the monotony of Crete. His despair? A flicker of connection. a sense that he wasn't entirely alone, that the world outside his worries still existed. He still had the debt, the looming foreclosure, the overwhelming problems of the farm. But for the first time in a long time, they didn't feel quite so insurmountable. Her presence, her listening, her quiet understanding had shifted something within him, a subtle change in perspective, a renewed sense of his own resilience. He banked the fire again and went to bed. The old house settling around him with familiar creaks and groans. Sleep came more easily this night, his mind quieter, less consumed by worry, the images of the storm and the flooded road replaced by the memory of conversation, of laughter, of shared work. He dreamed of rain, but it was a gentle, soaking rain, nourishing the dry earth, filling the creek with clear, clean water, bringing life back to the land. The next morning, the sun was shining. Bright, warm, glorious sunshine that streamed through the kitchen window, filling the room with light, chasing away the shadows. Elias woke with a sense of anticipation, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, a feeling that felt strange and new. He got up, made coffee, the familiar ritual comforting in the morning light, and went out to check the roads properly. The water had receded significantly overnight, pulled back by the earth and the creek. The back road was still muddy and had some standing water in the low spots, but the current was gone, and it looked like it might be passable for a car. Carefully, slowly, he went back to the house. Eleanor was already in the kitchen, dressed in his oversized clothes, looking out the window at the sunny yard, the drying puddles, the sparkling leaves on the trees. "Looks like the water's gone down," she said, turning to him, a hint of sadness in her voice, a subtle regret at the impending end of her unexpected stay. "Yeah," Elias said. "Should be able to get your car out today. Might be a tow truck needed, though, if the engine's waterlogged from sitting in the water." Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'll call for one," she said. "Once I get a signal. My phone should work once I get closer to town." They had coffee together, the conversation more subdued now, the reality of her impending departure hanging in the air. A quiet understanding that their time together was coming to an end. Elias felt a sense of disappointment. He had enjoyed her company more than he had expected, more than he had thought possible. "Thank you, Elias," she said again, her gaze meeting his, her dark eyes filled with gratitude. "For everything. For taking me in. For your kindness. For your company. You were a true lifeline in that storm." "Just glad I could help," Elias said, the familiar phrase feeling inadequate to express the connection he felt, the impact her presence had had on him. She spent the morning packing her few belongings. Putting her wet clothes into a plastic bag Elias found for her. She emerged from the guest room, her small suitcase in hand, dressed in her own clothes now, a dry set she'd had in her suitcase. She looked like a different person, the lost traveler replaced by a composed, elegant woman, ready to return to her world. "I'm ready whenever the tow truck gets here," she said, setting her suitcase by the door. They sat in the kitchen, waiting. The silence felt different now. The comfortable ease of the past 2 days replaced by a sense of anticipation and impending farewell. The kitchen, which had felt warm and full with her presence, now felt like it was already beginning to empty. "What kind of books do you write?" Elias asked, breaking the silence, a genuine curiosity about her world overcoming his usual reticence. He wanted to know more about the woman who had brought a flicker of light into his life. Eleanor hesitated for a moment, a subtle change in her expression, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "I write novels," she said, "mostly contemporary fiction. Stories about people, about life." "Anything I might have heard of?" Elias asked. He didn't read much, but he knew the names of a few famous writers, authors whose books he had seen in the small-town library or mentioned on the rare occasions he watched television. Eleanor smiled faintly, a private smile. "Perhaps," she said. "My pen name is E.M. Vance." E.M. Vance. The name sounded vaguely familiar, a name he felt like he had seen or heard somewhere, but he couldn't quite place it. He wasn't much of a reader, his reading limited to farming journals, catalogs, and the local newspaper. I'm sorry, he said. I don't really read much. Farming journals mostly. And the paper. Eleanor laughed softly, a warm, pleasant sound. That's all right, Elias, she said. Not everyone reads novels. I write them. It's a different world. She didn't elaborate, didn't reveal the extent of her fame, and Elias didn't press. The moment passed, the name lingering in his mind. A puzzle piece. He couldn't fit into place. They heard the sound of a truck in the distance, growing closer. The rumble of an engine on the dirt road. The tow truck. Eleanor's ride out of his life. Back to her world. The tow truck arrived, a large, noisy machine that seemed out of place in his quiet yard, a symbol of the outside world intruding on his solitude. The driver was a burly man from the nearest town, someone Elias knew slightly. He assessed Eleanor's car, partially submerged on the back road, its small size looking even more vulnerable in the mud and water. Yeah, she's pretty stuck, the driver said, shaking his head. And looks like water got into the engine good. Gonna need to tow her to the garage in town. See if we can dry her out. See if there's any life left in her. Eleanor nodded, making arrangements with the driver, providing her information, arranging for the car to be taken to a garage in Oak Haven. She turned back to Elias, standing by the porch, watching the proceedings. She was carrying her small suitcase, dressed in her own clothes now. A dry set she'd had in her suitcase. The oversized sweatpants and flannel shirt were gone, replaced by tailored trousers and a simple, elegant sweater. She looked like a different person, the lost traveler replaced by a composed, elegant woman, ready to return to her world, a world of which he knew nothing. Thank you again, Elias, she said, her voice firm, professional now, but her eyes held a warmth that was unmistakable, a sincerity that reached him. For everything. For your kindness. For your help. You were a true help in that storm. Glad you're all right, Elias said, the words simple, inadequate. She paused, looking at him, at the farmhouse, at the barn, at the fields stretching out under the morning sun. This place, she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. It's special, Elias. Truly special. Elias felt a pang in his chest, sharp and sudden. Special, and about to be lost. The foreclosure deadline was looming, just weeks away. I owe you, Eleanor said, her gaze meeting his, her dark eyes searching his face, as if looking for something. Is there anything I can do? Anything at all? Please, just name it. Elias hesitated. Here was his chance. He wanted to tell her about the debt, about the foreclosure, about the impossible situation he was in, about the possibility of losing everything. The words were right there, on the tip of his tongue. A desperate plea for help. But the words caught in his throat. He couldn't ask for help from a stranger, no matter how kind she had been, no matter how grateful she seemed. It went against his nature, his pride, his ingrained self-reliance. He had always faced his problems alone. No, he said, shaking his head, forcing the word out. Just glad you were safe. Get your car fixed up. Get to Oak Haven. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face, her expression thoughtful. She seemed to sense the unspoken burdens he carried, the weight he was trying to hide. She didn't press, didn't insist. All right, Elias, she said softly. But if you ever need anything, anything at all, please don't hesitate to contact me, for any reason. Promise me. She took a small card from her purse, a simple business card, and handed it to him. It was a thick white card, with her name, Eleanor Vance, and a phone number, and an email address. No company name, no title, no mention of being a writer. Just a name and contact information. Thank you, Elias said, taking the card, his fingers closing around it. He doubted he would ever use it. It felt like a gesture of politeness, a formality. Goodbye, Elias, she said, and thank you again. For everything. Goodbye, Eleanor, he replied. She turned and walked towards the tow truck, a small, elegant figure walking away from his life, back to her world. She got into the tow truck with the driver, and the truck slowly pulled away, carefully navigating the muddy road, towing her small, broken-down car behind it, a symbol of her unexpected journey. Elias stood on the porch, watching until the truck disappeared down the road, leaving him alone once more in the quiet yard. The sun was shining, the storm was over, the water was receding, but the silence felt heavier now. The absence of her presence more pronounced. The brief flicker of light she had brought seemed to have vanished with her. He looked at the business card in his hand. Eleanor Vance. He put it in his wallet, in a small, unused pocket. He walked back into the farmhouse, the familiar scent of wood smoke and old wood filling the air. The kitchen was quiet, empty. The mugs they had shared now sitting in the sink. The foreclosure notice was still under the stack of bills on the counter, a grim reminder of his reality, a weight that settled back onto his shoulders with renewed force. The unexpected visit, the brief intrusion of a stranger into his solitary life, had been a strange, temporary reprieve. It had brought a flicker of light into the darkness of his despair, a reminder that the world outside his worries still existed, that there were still kind people in it, that human connection was still possible. But it hadn't changed anything, not really. The debt was still there. The foreclosure was still looming. He was still alone, facing the loss of his Eberade. Home, his history, his identity. He went through the motions of his day, tending to the chickens, checking the fields, assessing the damage from the storm, making small repairs. His body ached with fatigue, but his mind was strangely clear, less consumed by worry than it had been before. He thought about Eleanor occasionally, wondering if she had gotten her car fixed, if she had reached her cabin in Oakhaven, if she had found the solitude and inspiration she was seeking. He thought about their conversations, about her quiet observations, her genuine interest in his life, her comment about the farm having a soul, about his life being a story. He thought about her comment. Sometimes, in the quiet, you find things you weren't even looking for. Things that change everything. He hadn't been looking for anything, just enduring, just trying to hold on. But her arrival, unexpected and sudden, had brought something into his life, a connection, however brief, a reminder that even in his isolation, even in his failure, he was still capable of human connection, of kindness, and of receiving it. The days that followed were a return to the familiar rhythm of his life, but with a subtle difference. The weight of the foreclosure was still there, a heavy burden, but it felt different, less crushing, somehow. The despair was still present, a constant companion, but it was tinged with a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of something else, something that felt like resilience, like a quiet determination to face whatever came next, to not give up entirely until the very last moment. He thought about Eleanor more often than he expected, her quiet presence a lingering warmth in the cold silence of the farmhouse. He wondered if she had started writing her novel, if his life, the farm, had truly been the spark she needed. He looked at the business card sometimes, tucked away in his wallet, a small, tangible reminder of her unexpected visit. Eleanor Vance. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. The foreclosure deadline loomed closer, a dark shadow on the horizon, growing larger, more menacing. Elias had exhausted every option he could think of, every potential source of help, every possible way to come up with the money. He had called every relative, every friend, every agricultural program he could find. All dead ends. He had come to terms, as much as he could, with the inevitable loss. He started the difficult, heartbreaking process of sorting through his belongings, deciding what few things he could possibly take with him when he had to leave. It was a painful task, sifting through the layers of his life, the memories attached to every object, deciding what was essential, what held the most precious memories, what could be left behind. He was in the barn, going through old tools, sorting them into piles, some to keep, some to sell for whatever little money they might bring, when the mail arrived. The mailman's Jeep pulled up the drive, a familiar sound in the quiet afternoon. Elias walked out to the mailbox, his steps heavy, his heart heavy. There wasn't much mail these days, mostly bills he couldn't pay, and junk mail he didn't bother to open. He opened the mailbox and pulled out the small stack of envelopes. A few bills, a flyer for a local auction, and a thick envelope, addressed to him, Elias Thorne, in elegant, flowing handwriting he didn't recognize, yet which sparked a faint, insistent memory. The return address was a law firm in the city, a name he recognized as large and reputable. He opened the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. A sudden, unexpected tremor of something he couldn't name, a mix of apprehension and a flicker of curiosity. Inside was a letter, printed on formal letterhead, and a thick stack of accompanying documents. He unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the words, his mind struggling to comprehend their meaning. It was from the law firm. It stated that they were representing a client who was interested in acquiring the outstanding debt on his property, Miller's Creek Farm, and providing substantial financial assistance to ensure the farm's continued operation and revitalization. Elias stared at the letter, his mind reeling. Acquiring the debt? Providing financial assistance? To him? It sounded impossible, like something out of a dream or a story. He read the letter again, slowly, carefully, trying to absorb the words, to understand what they meant. It mentioned a client who wished to remain anonymous for now, but who was deeply interested in preserving the farm and supporting his work, recognizing its historical significance and agricultural potential. It requested a meeting at his earliest convenience to discuss the possibility of a partnership, a collaboration for the future of the farm. A partnership? With an anonymous client? Who would do this? Why? He was a struggling farmer, on the brink of losing everything. A man with nothing to offer but debt and a worn-out farm. Who would want to partner with him? Who would invest in a lost cause? He looked at the law firm's name on the letterhead. A prestigious firm in the city, one he had only ever seen mentioned in the newspaper in articles about wealthy businessmen and large corporations. This wasn't a scam. This was real. This was serious. He sat down heavily on the steps of the porch, the letter and documents in his hand, the familiar weight of the foreclosure notice momentarily forgotten, replaced by the bewildering weight of this unexpected proposal. His heart was pounding in his chest, a frantic drum against his ribs. Could this be real? Could this be a way out? A lifeline? He read through the accompanying documents, his eyes widening as he understood their meaning, the scope of the proposal. They outlined a plan to pay off the entire outstanding debt on the farm, immediately halting the foreclosure proceedings. They proposed establishing a substantial fund to provide ongoing financial support for the farm's operations, allowing for necessary investments in equipment, infrastructure, and sustainable practices, things he had only dreamed of doing. And they proposed a partnership with him, Elias Thorne, as the farm manager, overseeing all agricultural operations, with a secure salary and the freedom to run the farm as he saw fit, guided by principles of sustainability and preservation. It was a comprehensive plan, designed to save the farm and give it a future. It was everything he had ever dreamed of, everything he had fought for, everything he had prayed for in the dark, lonely hours, presented to him out of the blue, by an anonymous client. It felt too good to be true, too impossible to be real. He looked at the elegant flowing handwriting on the envelope again, the handwriting that had sparked a faint memory. It was familiar, somehow, a connection he couldn't quite place, like a word on the tip of his tongue, elegant, distinctive. He reached into his wallet, his fingers fumbling slightly, and pulled out the small business card he had tucked away weeks ago, a small, white rectangle that felt strangely significant now. Eleanor Vance. He looked at the name, the phone number, the email address, and then he looked at the handwriting on the envelope. It was the same, unmistakably the same. Eleanor Vance. The writer seeking solitude. E.M. Vance. The name that had sounded vaguely familiar. His mind reeled, piecing together the fragments, the conversations, the observations, the unexpected arrival, the offer of help she had made, the card she had given him. She was the anonymous client, the best-selling author, the woman he had sheltered from the storm. He remembered their conversations, her quiet observations about the farm, her questions about his life, about what the land meant to him, about the history of the place. He remembered her comment. "There's a story here, Elias. Every life has a story, and some stories are just waiting to be told, waiting for the right words." He remembered her saying, "Sometimes, in the quiet, you find things you weren't even looking for, things that change everything." She had found a story here. His story. The story of the farm, of his family, of his struggle. And in being inspired by it, in finding the spark for her next novel in his life, she was offering him a lifeline, a chance to rewrite his own future, to save the farm, to preserve the story. He sat there for a long time, the letter and documents in his hand, the business card beside them, the weight of it all settling over him, the enormity of the revelation, the impossible kindness. It was overwhelming, unbelievable, a miracle delivered by a stranger he had shown a simple kindness to, a stranger who had seen something in him, in the farm, that he himself had almost forgotten. He thought about the night of the storm, the flooded road, her face in the headlights, her shivering body in his kitchen, the shared coffee, the quiet conversation, the work they had done together, the stories he had shared, the grief he had spoken of. He had offered her shelter, a warm drink, a dry place to sleep, a little food, a moment of safety in a storm. Simple acts of human kindness, born of instinct and a sense of decency. And in return, she was offering him his farm back, his life back, a future he thought was lost forever. He looked out at the fields, green and lush after the rain, vibrant with life, at the barn, solid and familiar against the sky, at the farmhouse, his home, his family's home. They were safe. Because of her. Because of a storm, a broken-down car, and an act of kindness. He picked up the business card, his fingers tracing the name. Eleanor Vance. He had to call her. He had to understand, fully understand, the depth of her generosity, the reasons behind this impossible gift. He went inside the farmhouse, his steps lighter than they had been in months, a sense of purpose, of hope, propelling him forward. He found the telephone, an old rotary phone on the wall in the hallway, and dialed the number on the card, his hand trembling slightly as he punched in the numbers. It rang several times before someone answered. A professional, crisp voice, a voice used to answering phones in a busy office. "Hello? This is Ms. Vance's office." Elias hesitated, suddenly unsure of what to say, how to explain who he was, why he was calling. "Yes. Hello," he stammered, his voice rough. "My name is Elias Thorne. I think Ms. Vance left a card with me a while back. I just received a letter from a law firm in the city about the farm." "Ah, Mr. Thorne," the voice said, immediately recognizing his name, the tone shifting slightly, becoming warmer, more helpful. "Yes, Ms. Vance informed us you might be in touch. We've been expecting your call. Please hold for a moment, I'll connect you." He waited, the silence on the line filled with the pounding of his heart. After a moment, another voice came on the line. A familiar voice, calm and clear, the voice of the woman who had shared his kitchen, his home, his life for 2 days. "Elias, is that you? Eleanor?" Elias said, the name coming easily to his lips. "Yes, it's me. I got the letter, from the law firm, and the documents." "Yes, Elias," Eleanor said softly, her voice warm and understanding. "I hoped you would. I wanted to make sure you received them. I wanted to explain." "Explain?" Elias said, the word filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Eleanor, this is incredible. I don't understand. Why would you do this? For me? For my farm?" Eleanor was silent for a moment, a pause that stretched across the miles between them. "Elias," she said, her voice quiet, thoughtful. "That night, in the storm, I was at a low point in my life, personally and creatively. I was feeling lost, disconnected, creatively blocked, burned out. My life felt empty, despite all the external success, the fame, the money. Ending up at your door, in that storm, stranded, vulnerable, It felt like fate intervened. And your kindness, Elias. Your simple, genuine, unconditional kindness, opening your home to a stranger, offering shelter and warmth and food without asking for anything in return, it cut through everything. It reminded me of what is real, what is important in the world. It grounded me. She paused, taking a breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with a quiet passion. And this farm, Elias, your farm, it's not just land and buildings. It has a soul, a deep, enduring soul woven from generations of life and work and connection to the earth. And your story, Elias, your life, your connection to this place, your struggle to hold on to it, it resonated with me deeply. It sparked something within me, something that had been dormant for a long time. It gave me the inspiration I was searching for, the heart of a story I needed to tell. It's the heart of my next novel, Elias. The setting, the feeling, the resilience, the quiet strength of the land and the man who works it. Your story. Elias was stunned into silence, the telephone receiver feeling heavy in his hand. His life, his struggles, the farm he was about to lose. The quiet despair he had carried was the inspiration for a best-selling author's next novel. It was a strange, humbling, unbelievable thought. I wanted to help, Eleanor continued, her voice gentle but firm. I wanted to give back. Your kindness saved me in a way, Elias. It pulled me out of a dark place, a place of creative and personal stagnation. And I wanted to help save something that is so clearly a part of you, something that holds so much history and meaning, something that inspired me so deeply. The legal structure, the trust, the partnership, it's all designed to ensure the farm is safe, that it is preserved, that you are secure, and that you can continue to do what you love, what you were meant to do, what your family has done for generations. But it's so much, Elias said, still struggling to comprehend the magnitude of her generosity, the sheer amount of money involved in paying off the debt and providing ongoing support. The debt, it's a lot of money. A fortune. It's not about the money, Elias, Eleanor said gently, her voice filled with conviction. Not for me. It's about the story. It's about the connection. It's about kindness and how it can create unexpected ripples in the world. And it's about ensuring this special place, your home, your family's legacy, is preserved, is given a chance to thrive. She explained the details of the proposal again, the charitable trust that would be set up to own the farm, funded entirely by her. The funding that would be provided for the farm's operations and improvements, his role as farm manager with a secure salary, the freedom he would have to run the farm according to his own principles of sustainability and preservation, his seat on the trust's board. It was exactly as the documents outlined, a genuine offer of help, a partnership built on respect, and a shared vision for the farm's future. I understand this is a lot to take in, Elias, Eleanor said. It's a big change. Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, is excellent. He can answer any questions you have, explain everything in detail, walk you through the documents. Please, take your time. Think about it. Talk to him. But I hope you'll say yes, Elias. I truly do. I believe in this farm, and I believe in you. Yes, Elias said, the word a question and an answer all at once. Eleanor, of course, yes. It's a miracle. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know what to say. Your kindness was thanks enough, Elias, she said softly, her voice warm. And knowing that the farm is safe, that you are safe, that this place will continue to be what it is, that's all the thanks I need. And perhaps, she added, a hint of a smile in her voice, perhaps you'll let me visit sometimes, see how the farm is doing, see how the story unfolds in real life. You're welcome here any time, Eleanor, Elias said, his voice filled with gratitude, with a sense of wonder. Always. This place, it's yours too. Now, in a way, you saved it. In a way, she agreed. But it's your story, Elias. And I'm just the one writing it down and helping to ensure it has a future. They talked for a while longer, the conversation flowing easily, comfortably, as it had in his kitchen during the storm. The initial awkwardness was gone, replaced by a sense of shared purpose, of an unlikely but strong connection, a friendship forged in the most unexpected circumstances. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity, a stark contrast to the quiet despair that had defined Elias's life for so long. Lawyers from the city arrived at the farmhouse, not with foreclosure papers, but with documents outlining the establishment of the trust, the transfer of funds, the partnership agreement. They were professional, efficient, and respectful, treating Elias not as a failing farmer, but as a valued partner, the expert on the land, the heart of the operation. The debt was paid off, the foreclosure canceled. The weight that had been crushing Elias for years, the constant, suffocating burden of debt and impending loss, lifted, leaving him feeling lightheaded, almost disoriented by the sudden absence of that familiar pressure. The farm was safe. His home was secure. The future, which had been a terrifying blank space, a dead end, was now filled with possibility, with light. Eleanor visited occasionally during this time of transition, not with the legal team, but on her own, driving a new, sturdy car that could handle the back roads, a car that was a far cry from the small, broken-down vehicle that had brought her to his door. She was still the famous author, her name appearing in newspapers and magazines, her books on bestseller lists, but when she was at the farm, she was simply Eleanor, the woman who had been stranded in the storm, the writer seeking inspiration, the friend who had offered a lifeline. She walked the farm with Elias, asking questions about his plans, his ideas for the future, the improvements he wanted to make, the crops he wanted to plant, the sustainable practices he wanted to implement. She was genuinely interested in the practicalities of farming, the challenges and rewards, the connection to the land. She spoke about her novel, how the farm, his life, their meeting, had sparked the story, how the characters were taking shape. Inspired by the resilience of the land and the quiet strength of the people who worked it, the themes of loss, hope, and unexpected connection. Their friendship deepened, an unlikely bond between the quiet farmer and the famous author, built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a profound sense of gratitude. Elias learned more about her world, the pressures of her career, the isolation that fame and success could bring, the constant demands on her time and energy. Eleanor, in turn, found a sense of peace, an authenticity at the farm that she couldn't find anywhere else, a place where she could simply be, away from the demands of her public life. With the financial burden lifted, Elias was able to invest in the farm, making necessary repairs and improvements that had been put off for years, purchasing new, efficient equipment, implementing sustainable practices he had only dreamed of before, improving the soil health, diversifying the crops. He hired a young man from the community to help him, bringing a new energy to the farm, a sense of shared purpose. Miller's Creek Farm, once on the brink of collapse, began to thrive, the land responding to the renewed care and investment. The farm became a place of renewal, not just for the land, but for Elias himself. The despair that had consumed him for so long began to recede, replaced by a sense of purpose, of hope, of quiet joy. He was still a man of few words, but his eyes held a new light, a reflection of the future he was building, a future he had thought was impossible. Eleanor's novel, inspired by the farm and their meeting, became a bestseller, praised by critics and readers alike for its authentic portrayal of rural life, its compelling characters, its themes of resilience, loss, and the unexpected ways human connection can transform lives. She dedicated the book to Elias, a quiet acknowledgement of his role in its creation, a dedication that only a few people would understand, but which meant the world to him. One sunny afternoon, months after the storm, the farm buzzing with activity, the market garden overflowing with produce, the chickens clucking contentedly. Elias was working in the market garden, the soil rich and dark. Beneath his hands, the smell of earth and growing things filling the air, when Eleanor arrived for a visit. She walked out to the garden, dressed in simple clothes, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the sun, looking relaxed and happy. "Looks like you have a good harvest coming in, Elias," she said, smiling, her eyes taking in the rows of vibrant green plants. "Looks like it," he agreed, standing up, wiping his hands on his trousers, a smile on his own face. "Good rain we had back then?" set everything up. That storm, Eleanor said softly, her gaze meeting his, a shared memory passing between them. It changed everything, didn't it? For both of us. Elias nodded, a small smile on his face, a smile that held a lifetime of gratitude and wonder. It did, he said. Brought you here, and in the quiet, he added, echoing her own words from that night in his kitchen, words that had stayed with him. We both found things we weren't even looking for. Eleanor's smile widened, a genuine radiant smile. We did, she said, and I'm so grateful we did. They stood there for a moment, the farmer and the author, two people from different worlds, connected by a storm, a farmhouse, a shared story, and an act of kindness that had rewritten both their futures. The farm stretched out around them, vibrant and alive, a testament to resilience, to hope, and to the extraordinary things that can happen when you open your door to a stranger in the rain. When a simple act of humanity creates ripples of change that extend far beyond what you can see. Elias Thorne, the struggling farmer, had offered shelter to a lost traveler. Unaware she was a famous author who would not only find the spark for her next novel in his life, in the soul of his farm, but would also provide the lifeline that would rewrite his future, saving his farm, honoring his Purit family's legacy, and bringing a new chapter of hope and possibility to his life. The storm had brought darkness and despair, but it had also brought light, in the form of a stranger who saw the story in his struggle and helped him write a new ending.